I'm here to talk about the recent events in Lebanon, especially the resignation of Prime Minister Hariri, and especially from the Saudi angle and their regional sort of context and reverberations. So clearly, the resignation of Prime Minister Hariri, which was performed on video from Saudi Arabia, was not just a Hariri decision, but essentially a Saudi decision. Hariri is very closely aligned with Saudi Arabia, and in fact, all the Lebanese political parties are closely aligned with some foreign patron or other. So this is very much a decision made in Riyadh. In effect, it's an effort by Saudi Arabia and its, presumably its allies to declare war on Hezbollah and Iran in Lebanon. And I don't think it's primarily linked in a very direct causal way with the wave of arrests in Saudi Arabia that happened at the same weekend, or the missile fired by the Houthis at the Riyadh International Airport. I think all these were sort of coincidentally synchronistic events, but I don't think any of the three were intimately linked in an organic causal way. So that's the first thing worth saying. I think that what happened in Lebanon is much more closely linked to developments in northern and western Iraq and in eastern Syria that have happened in the past few weeks, particularly in the aftermath of the Kurdish referendum, where Iranian-linked forces connected with the Hashd Sha'bi, the Popular Mobilization Forces, the elements of the Iraqi military, the Quds Brigade, and their allies, including Hezbollah and the al-Assad forces in Syria, have basically taken control of a fairly contiguous area in western and northern Iraq, the Iraqi-Syrian border, and Deir ez-Zor on the other side, and areas of eastern Syria, such that, in effect, the long contemplated Shiite crescent leading from Iran all the way down into Beirut and the Mediterranean has basically begun to emerge. And certainly the land bridge from Iran to Lebanon through Iraq and Syria has become a practical reality. Now, it needs to be consolidated. It's very tenuous and fragile. It could be broken in half a dozen places, in a dozen ways over the coming year. But I think clearly this is such a huge gain for Iran and its allies, including Hezbollah, that that has prompted, I think, the Saudi response, which is right. We're going to go after you where you live in the Arab world, where Iran began to sow its mischief back in the early 80s in the Arab world, that is, say, in Lebanon, and particularly with regard to Hezbollah. Removing Hariri essentially opens the Lebanese state as dominated by Hezbollah to a whole series of headaches, problems, international sanctions, isolation, and potential other problems. Now, one of the big questions is, what else can the Saudis bring to bear? And one of the big question marks, of course, has to do with the potential for an Israeli-Hezbollah conflict. And many people are speculating that all of this is a prelude to a big war between Israel and Hezbollah. And if you'd asked me a few weeks ago what the chances of an Israel-Hezbollah conflict in 2018 were, I would have given you a pretty high probability, certainly over 50%. But I actually think the chances may have gone down in this regard. I think given the gains that Iran and its allies, including Hezbollah, have made in Iraq and Syria, and this big prize that they've been working for over a decade, which now needs to be, is very fragile and now needs to be consolidated over the next couple of years and could be tenuous and fleeting, I think the incentive for Hezbollah to actually have a conflict with Israel has greatly collapsed. And so I think that it will require an all-out and relentless Israeli attack on Hezbollah in the face of Hezbollah's resistance to get involved. Hezbollah, I think, would refuse to get involved, no matter what kind of blows they receive short of really an all-out attack by Israel. It would refuse to get engaged in an escalation that could lead to and justify a conflict. So I actually think that in a way, it's probably a matter of when rather than if the Israelis decide to act. But for now, they won't receive any cooperation from Hezbollah in setting the stage for a war and escalating and going in that direction. And on the contrary, I think there'll be a lot of resistance. So the big question marks now are, what does Saudi Arabia plan to do in Lebanon to make life difficult for Hezbollah, to squeeze Iran and Hezbollah where they live in Lebanon? What's the potential Israeli role? What's the potential American role? What are the rest of the Arabs going to do? And do the Saudis have a plan B and C in Lebanon beyond simply taking the fig leaf of Hariri and the participation of a plausible Sunni and Saudi-allied prime minister away from Hezbollah and the Hezbollah-dominated Lebanese state? We'll see.